Welcome to the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals Videogram on PTSD Part 3, Cognitive Restructuring. In this video, we're going to look at how individuals under the guidance of a licensed specialist are able to reconstruct the memory of the trauma in a better way, and to help in that reconstruction to help fragmented memories become more assimilated into the long-term memory itself so that it can function as a normal memory instead of a PTSD type memory of trauma itself. And we're going to look at a few therapies that licensed counselors and PTSD specialists utilize sometimes in trying to help individuals recreate that narrative, that restructuring, and help the processing of that fragmented memory become more stable itself. In essence, what happens in reconstructing is trauma requires integration. And the initial traumatic memory, the fragment itself, is trapped in an overactive amygdala. And within the amygdala, the memory is fragmented and it is allowed to almost exist as if in a present state, constantly being triggered and aroused to the point where the emotion of the moment is still felt years later, instead of being processed properly in the hippocampus, where it can be logically understood and integrated. And that's why the reconstructing of the actual memory of the actual traumatic event is so essential. So dissociated trauma and memories need to become integrated. And what happens is during this restructuring, this reinterpreting of the event, some of the automatic thoughts that might have existed, which are distorted because they're emotionally charged, can then be seen in a more reasonable light itself. Unproductive ideas can be rectified and identified properly, and then they can be integrated into what we call functional thoughts, which are properly found within the hippocampus itself. So the activation of the memory and the problems with PTSD are not so much sometimes the trauma, but also the belief that is associated with the trauma itself. And this is why it's so important to confront the trauma, to properly understand the trauma, and to then process the trauma. But within an individual who is suffering from PTSD, there are many distortions of reality within that fragmented memory, that emotionally charged memory. And these distortions cause a variety of issues affecting one's self-esteem, affecting one's guilt regarding a situation. And these distortions can become very much anchors to an individual, not allowing them to escape the past. So it's very important to weed out the distortions and then to allow a better working memory of the actual situation to re-emerge in that reconstruction itself. And here's a few we're going to go through regarding distortions. So we have some which we refer to as a flawed fixation, where the individual only fixates, only focuses on the bad that happened during the event. And this is very similar to dismissal of anything positive. The individual dismisses anything that was good that was done in the event as well. So only fixation on the bad, nothing on the good. So maybe an individual, say a firefighter, runs in and saves 2 people, but a third one burns to death, and he has a traumatic experience from it, a PTSD incident from it. A firefighter then has to start to understand that there are good elements of what this individual did, and it's not just all completely bad itself. There's a third one, which we refer to as assuming. It's mind reading what others may think about yourself, about the individual suffering from PTSD, that are not accurate, and to jumping to conclusions and predicting how others are going to think before you even know. So if you're a soldier returning from war and certain things happened, you're concluding that individuals are going to think, because the incident was of a more controversial maybe element, they're going to think that you did wrong as a soldier before assuming that you did only your very best, that the soldier did only their very best itself. Other distortions include also catastrophizing. So when a catastrophe occurs, individuals will look at it and they'll remember the situation far worse than what it really was. So the individual reacted a certain way, but the memory is so charged that the individual will think of it in a way that they behaved worse than what they perceived in real time. And this delusion can cause issues in regards to the person's recovery itself. What ifs, it's always human nature to second guess. And when we look at what ifs, the individual is constantly tortured by, I should have done this, I should have done that. What if I had done this instead of that? And this produces a lot of guilt and regrets. And therapists can sometimes help individuals say, well, how about instead of focusing on what if or what I should have done, well, what about what I could have done? And was it within the realm of possibilities of being accomplished successfully? At the moment, with the freedom that I possessed, was I able to do everything that I could? And were they the best case scenarios for the situation? And were they the best case scenarios for the situation within that moment of time? And were they the best case scenarios in that moment of time that could be successfully implemented? And with my training and everything that I have as an individual, was I able to the best of my abilities, implement those? So a lot of times individuals with PTSD overemphasize guilt, and they expect them to be able to do things of a much higher level, of almost of a superhuman level. And then they judge themselves based on that instead of what the situation dictated and if they did. And I think another one is, even if one had certain choices, limited choices, certain choices that might not even work out, was the individual under immense pressure, and what psychologically can be expected of individuals in that situation. So when individuals with PTSD start judging themselves from a what if or should have standpoint, there are many other levels of points that can be made that can put the what if in its more proper perspective for that particular individual. We also have individuals who are all or none. There's no middle ground in how they behave during an event. The outcome has no gray. There is either you succeeded or you didn't, and the judgment is 100% on these types of individuals. Also, there are distortions that deal with feelings as fact. Many of the feelings that an individual is experiencing through triggers are not how the event actually unfolded. Also, abusive labeling, and this is common with many victims who were maybe raped. They label oneself as damaged or a whore, or as a soldier, maybe a coward. So these types of abusive labeling puts the person in the event itself, and the event in its nature, in its hideous nature, becomes the person's character. So the individual is not able to separate themselves from the event, and the labeling of the event becomes the label of the person. Also, comparisons are a dangerous type of distortion, where instead of seeing how the individual performed in a particular act, they're always judging, well, so-and-so would have done this or that. I should have done this or that. And again, you cannot put another person in your situation or the person with PTSD situation, because you did, or the individual did, to the best of their ability, what they could do in the given events, the objective events, the objective restraints of that event. Again, that idea of an individual being more superhuman than what they really are. We also have a too extreme type of distortion where the event is completely personalized, where the individual takes full fault, makes themselves more responsible for what occurred without even looking at the perpetrator or others who are at fault. For instance, again, if we go back to the firefighter, well, who caused the fire? Who didn't take the necessary precautions in it? Who didn't look for the warning signs? But instead, the firefighter, for not getting that third person, saved two, but he didn't get that third person, he personalizes it completely on himself when there's other elements in it. And with personalizing and removing guilt, therapists can go through this story and go, well, how much guilt do you give yourself? And you give yourself a number, the person suffering from PTSD. And then they go, well, what about this person? How much should they be blamed? And then you go back and you reevaluate. And that's one way to help against personalizing. As that number goes down, the individual discovers that they're not as much fault as they thought. Now, there's also the other extreme with blaming. An individual takes no account after event and blames everyone else for that bad day going forward. So it's important to get past these distortions, these untruths about the event, about the memory of the event, about what occurred, how one labels oneself. And it's important to restructure this event and to remove the bad beliefs, the unproductive ideas, so that one can move past the trauma and integrate the memory long-term itself. And this is why counseling and discussing the trauma is so important. Talking about what an individual feels regarding regarding the event itself. And that's the only way unproductive ideas and distortions and false beliefs can be exposed. They cannot be exposed if it's kept within. The only way to expose them is to reveal, and then to have an individual help guide. And these are why other therapies come into play. Prolonged exposure, which is very risky, should only be done under the care of a licensed professional, where individuals go through their feelings and the event itself. Hypnosis is another useful tool that can be used. EFT, or the emotional freedom technique, which is a way of unblocking trauma through various points throughout the body. It's an alternative therapy, and it is based on similar concepts of acupuncture, except one working through themselves through various pressure points throughout the body and discussing the trauma and removing the trauma itself. Also, EMDR, which deals with how the eyes themselves move, and it's correlated with how memory and the eye movement itself is processed. And by thinking about the event with a therapist and a certain movement of one's eyes, it's thought to correlate with how memories are better processed, especially emotionally charged memories. So it deals with eye movement, desensitizing and reprocessing itself. And that's what the EMDR stands for. Also, expressive arts through art, music, writing, and poetry. Also, a therapist can make an individual create a life review, and life reviews allow the individual to write about not just the event, but their life itself, and to document certain points about who they are, their overall character. And it can open up new perspectives about the person, maybe a better balance of the event, bridge certain memory gaps that maybe the traumatic memory did not collect as well, and to put them into perspective better, and creating a better sense and an acceptance of the event itself through the life review. The life review can separate the individual from the incident itself. Dream work, also understanding the essence of dreams, can be worked through with a therapist. And all these things can lead to a higher self-esteem and a resolution of guilt about the event, and help restructuring, reconstructing the actual narrative itself. And we'll have a few supplemental videos that deal with resolution of guilt, dream work, and higher self-esteem as well. And a lot of this material is all coming through the SM580's course book, the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder source book. And it's an excellent guide filled with information and a primary source for many of the videos that we have done to correlate with the textbook and the course itself. If you would like to learn more about our stress management certification, or even our crisis intervention or grief counseling certification, please visit the site. Below is a link to the stress management certification. The office phone is 330-652-7776, and our email is info@aihcp.org. So in regards to post-traumatic stress disorder, it's very, very important to confront the problem, the trauma, but also to have a good idea of really what occurred, as opposed to what an individual may think or feel occurred. And it's important to restructure the event, and again, to process the dissociated material. And that's the key. And it's a very difficult key to unlock, because it's very difficult material. It's traumatic. It's so traumatic that it scarred the mind, so to speak. It wasn't able to be fully processed. But once you get past that, once the individual suffering from PTSD gets past that, then a whole chance of healing opens up once one is able to restructure that narrative. I'd like to thank you for listening, and have a good day.